a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie the Riveter.
Red bandana, blue overalls, and unbreakable determination, Rosie became a symbol of empowerment. But Rosie isn't just a fictional character. She represents millions of real women who worked in factories, shipyards, and assembly lines, proving that they too could build the tools for victory. The story of Rosie the Riveter speaks to all the women who from 1942 to 1945 went to work in the factories while the men in the USA were fighting over in Europe. To understand Rosie and all the women who built the equipment for World War II, you need to head to what is now the quiet Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California. Today the area is an isolated quiet bay that overlooks the San Francisco Bay. But if you had been here in 1942, it would have been a whole different story. Out of these shipyards were launched 714 ships in just 4 years. To accomplish that task, over 100,000 workers were signed up as shipbuilders. Almost all of them were women. The Rosie the Riveter National Historic Site tells the story of the men and women who worked on these ships needed for the World War II effort. On December 7, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the United States had about 300 active combat vessels. By the war's end in 1945, there would be 6,768 combat vessels in service. The logistics for that level of production was massive. Europe was being starved by constant bombings, and so it was up to the United States to get the ball rolling and start producing. In March of 1942, the U.S. Navy formed the Construction Battalion, also known as the Seabees. In April of 1942, they started to accept African Americans, but that still wasn't enough. So on July 1942, the WWII was formed. The acronym stood for the Women Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Service. Recruiting women for what was traditionally a men's job was not easy. To help the United States with its war efforts, the U.S. War Department enlisted the help of two titans of American assembly. One was Ford of the Ford Motor Company, and the other was Henry J. Kaiser of the Steel Production Company. These two men immediately switched over from production of cars to tanks and warships almost overnight. This is the Richmond Ford Assembly Plant. Out of this building, 49,000 Jeeps and 91,000 tanks were produced for World War II. This was the Ford A building. It is now a pickleball court. Back in the day, this is where they would assemble all the cars. After the war, the building was preserved and now it is used for regional pickleball tournaments. To the right of the Richmond Ford Assembly Plant is the Rosie the Riveter National Historic Site. Admission to the site is free. Inside there are many interactive displays about women who helped build the ships for World War II.
And the pilots sent me postcards from all over the world. I even got one from Iceland.
To the right of the Rosie the site is Liberty Park, which is named after the Liberty ships that were assembled at this location. This monument shows some of the names of the people who worked at this location. You can see the job was mostly a temporary job. No worker stayed on for more than 4 years. After the war was over, many of the women that were working were laid off to let the veterans take their jobs. We are now standing in at what one time was a ship launch. At the peak of production in 1943, as many as 3 ships a day were being launched from a launch just like this one. After the war was over, demand for production was not as great, and the Richmond shipyards were closed down. The Ford Motor Company resumed production again in Detroit, And Kaiser built up an entirely new business, that of the medical network provider, and so today they are known for the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system. We hope you enjoyed this look into an interesting time in history, and we will see you on the next video.
I'm making more than $1 an hour, more than 3 times the minimum wage, and the same as the men. We can fit in those tight spots the men can't reach. And honestly, we're better. Just this morning, the foreman came through saying, "You ladies have to stop working so fast. The men are going to want their jobs back after the war, and they can't meet your rivets per hour." I guess they're...
I said, listen, I want to work for my country. But you have to go in there.
There's something true about red, white, and blue about Rosie.